Hey YouTube, Master Rider here, and welcome to my Kamen Rider Build series review. Finally, right? It's what America's been clamoring for. Seriously though, I actually appreciate those of you that have been continuously requesting it because it makes me feel like people actually enjoy these. I'm actually going to talk a little bit about that, why it took so long at the end, but I don't want to bore you here at the beginning in case you're actually here for the series review. Here's my pitiful build display, so you know what I'm looking at, or talking about. Okay, so let's go ahead and start right off talking about the story for Build. That's usually how I start these things. I overall did enjoy the story for Build. Okay, now to characters. No, I'm kidding. There was definitely some problems with it. There's really not any perfect stories that I can think of, or at least very few. Most of my problems came near the end, but for the most part, it had a lot of what I liked about Rider. I've mentioned a couple times on my channel throughout various videos that one of my favorite things about Rider specifically that separates it from Sentai for me is that it tends to have a little bit more serialized, mystery-based storytelling. And that's a lot of what Build had, which from the get-go got me. It had a lot of really good momentum, and you know, we would go into these different little mini arcs, and they only really, I think, stumbled near the end, which I'll get to shortly here. But, you know, I liked the setup of everything. They raised a lot of questions in a way that I hate to immediately compare it to X-Aid, but because I made my peace with X-Aid and ended up enjoying it near the end more. But something that bothered me in early X-Aid was how they set up questions that felt more like I was missing something, like I had missed a scene or should know this. But Build set it up in a way that it was like clear we were supposed to be thinking about it or theorizing or, you know, looking for clues or whatever. And I really liked that. And I like how the story, like, we kind of started with a little bit more of a formulaic bit with Build and getting him and Ryuga to be friends and Ryuga's rise to being a rider. And then once we find out who Evolt is, things changed. We go into the arc that basically more so focused on the politics of the different nations. That entire thing set up an interesting dynamic. And then, you know, you have them all coming together. You have Rogue's arc. And I thought they all flowed really well into each other. And I like how distinct they felt. Like, I like how you kind of had this early period where it was very status quo-y. That's not Status Chloe, that's Hyperforce. No, I'm just kidding. That sounds like a Chloe spinoff. Anyway, and then things changed once Evolt arrived, and I remember thinking specifically during the arc once, or, well, Evolt revealed himself, he had always arrived, but during the arc where they were doing, like, the fight with Hokuto and Grease and stuff, how there was so much going on that was at the core focus, and we had barely even scratched the surface of, like, big questions about Evolt and Mars and stuff, which I thought was super cool, because I felt like there was just a lot of content to mine, which I really liked. And, you know, I think they stumbled near the end where it was one of those clear cases that Toku's different than other shows. I mean, you do have network requirements and certain things and episode orders, but Toku has the unique case of it A, has to cater to a toy line in terms of plot points, and B, it has to fill a certain runtime, but it's also not guaranteed. Like, you're guaranteed 45 plus generally, but you don't know how many plus, so oftentimes you can sort of tell where they struggled with pacing a little bit, and I feel that happened in the last quarter of Build, where we hit this bit where it would be like, Evolt, this is my final plan! I can now destroy you! And then they would foil it, and he'd be like, psh, thought that was my final plan? It was only the first part. Time for part 2. Oh, he foiled it again? Can't believe you thought that was the final plan. And then after that, continuously, 10 times later. No. I swear this is my final plan. Time after that. This time for real. I'm not lying. This is the final plan. Like, that's what it was like, where it felt like we kept building to Evolt's final, you know, goal, and then the writers would knock them back, and it would be like, oh no, but it's so much bigger than that. And they kept throwing twists and bigger stakes out there, and it felt very wheel spinny, and I didn't like that, and I think it kind of took the wind out of Evolt as a character a little bit. I did end up liking the conclusion. I thought it was a pretty good resolution where it was kind of a happy ending, but it was a little bit bittersweet. And I like that Sento and Ryuga still got to know each other in that world, but it didn't take the wind out of some of the bigger sacrifices and stuff totally. I just used take the wind out twice. That's like my phrase of the day. But yeah, I think the story was mostly good. There was a lot of good character stuff in it, lots of good reveals, lots of stuff I liked about the plot and lore, but I just think that they stumbled. I think that they could have benefited by maybe trying to expand on certain things without wheel spinning so much, and I'll get to that in characters, which is why I'm going to kind of cut the plot off here because a lot of the plot that I'll be talking about is involved in the characters, because I think the core focus of the series a lot of the time was the relationship between the characters, specifically Build and Claus, or Ryuga, Krazi. So yeah, to get into characters. So you have Sento, who was an amnesiac rider, the first we'd had in a while. I was worried about him to start, because I'm a dad. No, I'm just kidding. No, but because I thought he was going to be one of those lighter comedic protagonists, and I really miss having an awesome, like, hardcore, badass rider protagonist. We haven't had one of those in years. But he ended up being pretty balanced. Like, he definitely was more of a lighter character. Like, he wasn't like a Tendo or a Tsukasa. But, like, I ended up liking his attitude. Like, they had that whole meta bit of, like, I'm the protagonist, which led to a lot of really funny stuff. And I actually, early on, found him to be a pretty interesting character, because originally it was kind of implied that his previous persona was this evil guy, or like very morally ambiguous guy, where he was just like doing science experiments for the sake of finding out about it, didn't really care what happened to people. And I loved that idea that his previous persona was basically evil. He gets amnesia, new face, and then he becomes a hero. I found that incredibly fascinating psychologically and made for an interesting backstory. Unfortunately, I felt like they did a lot of backpedaling. Like, the more we found out about his persona was Kisaragi, right? That's Gentaro. I'm forgetting now. But the more we found out about his previous alter ego, especially during the arc later when he got his memories back, it felt like, I mean, it didn't feel like this is what they did. And I know there was hints as they slowly revealed it, but basically the ultimate resolution was he wasn't a bad guy. He was doing stuff for good reasons, but he was going too far. And I didn't like that. I felt like they were trying to make it okay to root for him for kids or something, but I found it way more fascinating if his previous self was just straight up like, I don't care what happens to these people, this technology's fascinating, let's experiment on them. And then as Sento, he becomes a hero. That was way more fascinating to me. I hated the backpedaling of it. I did think it was cool when we got to see his old persona basically be in full control without Sento, learn of what Sento did. They even changed like his mannerisms and style when he was transformed. That was cool. But that kind of soured it for me a bit. He probably could have been in my top 5 mains if that hadn't happened. Not that I dislike him now, I do still like him, and I think there is aspects of that dynamic that I did like, but it's just unfortunate that, to use that phrase again, they took the wind out of it for me a bit there with how much I liked that. I do have to say though, of all the writers that usually have really kind of cheesy, preachy lines, he's one of the very few where I actually believed he was that good heroic person, and they weren't just telling it to me because that's what they're supposed to say. So then you have Banjo and Kazooie. Yaha! No. Their dynamic of Banjo and Sento is probably my all-time favorite writer character dynamic. It was so entertaining with their general banter, the meta banter about the protagonists, the meta narrations. That's something I'll talk about in a minute. But just watching their relationship evolve and watching them help each other, specifically Sento helping Ryuga be better, but they really bettered each other, and you watch their relationship not only evolve between the two of them, but their individual characters evolved because of that relationship. And I thought it was so well done, and I liked that a lot. I wanted to say that. Ryuga kind of had a similar thing where there was something I really liked about his character that later on they kind of undercut, which was I liked that he was kind of this dude that just got caught up in all this nonsense, and he, you know, becomes a writer. It was really cool to watch his rise to being a writer. I liked that they didn't rush it, that he sort of had to become worthy of taking up a mantle, and then watching him continue to grow. And I liked that he just seemed to get caught up in all of it and became a hero. And so I was a little disappointed when later they did this whole chosen one, not chosen one, but like he was all of a sudden special, like, oh, you're part of Evolt. I think it just took it out of it for me a bit. And then it also was kind of confusing because I felt like they never fully got a grasp on how much they wanted to commit to that. Like, I felt like at one point he was just supposed to straight up be a part of Evolt, like literally like he blobbed off a part and it became a clone or something. Not a clone, but it was something similar. But then they're like, no, he's his own person. He just like hosts part of his DNA. It's almost like he's got 3 parents. But then like after that reveal, it's like they couldn't decide which one they wanted. That's what it felt like to me. Like depending on what story we were in, it was like, oh, I can still sense Evolt's thoughts. You're a part of me. And it's like, no, I don't have any of his DNA in me. That sounded, nope. But it just, I didn't like it, period, but I think there was some interesting potential there of him being basically like the body of Evolt and then becoming this hero. I liked that, but it just, again, it felt like they couldn't commit to what they wanted. Like, there was maybe a clear direction in the early stages of development of the story, but then they just couldn't pull the trigger on it. I don't know. Maybe it was just me, but that felt confusing. But that didn't take away how much I enjoyed their dynamic. Quickly to rewind, I just wanted to also highlight that I did like how Sento's mystery played out with his identity, the way we originally thought he was a nobody, and then you find out this crazy soap opera face, like, surgery stuff, or not surgery, but whatever. I thought that was really cool. It was kind of twisty and crazy and soap opera, but I forgot to mention that. I wanted to rewind. Now, fast forward. So, now we have, I'm going to talk about Grease. I'm going over the main writers first. It's interesting because the guy that plays Grease, if you didn't know, is the same actor that played 1986 Ixa, aka Wataru's father from Kiva, who is my favorite writer of all time, 1986 Ixa, favorite character. So I was really excited when we learned that this dude was going to be on, because I assumed I was going to like Grease right away. Not that I disliked Grease. I still do like the actor. I liked Grease's performance. I thought his stuff, his like, oh, I love this Mitan stuff was really funny. I really liked his send-off going Grease Blizzard, the you're damn right with the transformation. That was the most I probably ever felt for his character. But he just kind of fell flat for me. And not in a like, oh, I think his character was awful way. But I just never connected with him. It's funny because he ended up actually having that everyman story that Ryuga initially did in terms of just an everyday guy that kind of got mixed up in all this politics. Like, he never ended up having like a, oh, you were secretly tied to the backstory all along. He was literally just an everyday dude doing this for his friends and family. But I just could never get attached to it. Maybe it's because I hated his Yu-Gi-Oh friends that looked like their Yu-Gi-Oh sidekicks. They just all annoyed me. And even though there was scenes that I was like, this is really well done in terms of selling their bond, I just never got attached to him. It wasn't really until his final sacrifice that I felt really anything for him. Again, it's not like I disliked him, it's just, I think maybe there was a little bit more expectation because of how much I liked Ixa that I was going to like him, but I just never got fully attached. Meanwhile, you have this brilliant guy Rogue over here who is one of the weirdest changes throughout the series, because he kind of starts as that like generic badass villain, and then, you know, he gets betrayed, he comes back as a badass writer, and his motivations were kind of around, he's like a little bit messed up in the head from what got done to him, and he, you know, had stuff to do with wanting to take over for his father with the government. That was another story that I initially just, I got it. Same thing with Grease. Like, I got what they were going for, but I was just never fully invested in it. But then he became one of my favorites later on when he joined the group, and they added comedic bits to him, which is very out of character for me because sometimes Toku humor can be very hit or miss for me. And sometimes when they do it at the wrong time, it takes me out of it. And the idea of taking this originally kind of stoic, generic, badass villain character and giving him these crazy comedic bits, like with the shirts, like on paper should honestly have rubbed me the wrong way, but I loved it. He became one of my favorite parts of the later half of Build. The different shirts, the so bold, the approachable. I think what it did is that it endeared me to him, and it made me believe that he could be a part of this group. And that's something I really liked about the series, is obviously Sento and Ryuga were a huge dynamic for the series, and probably the main one. But I liked this sort of crazy found family that came out of these four writers and the two girls, of basically all these people that were manipulated by the situation, by Evolt, and they sort of made this little crazy found family. And I think Gentoku being lighter and more bold and approachable just not only sold his character for me, but sold the other characters softening to him and had me really appreciating the dynamic more. So that was a huge surprise for me. As for like characters like Misora, I was fine with her. I think she had some really good scenes later on, especially like with Grease's thing, like her dynamic with Grease, again, that was really sold well at the end. Some pretty good scenes involving her dad, but and I think she did grow over the course of the series, but it wasn't like something when I'm like, oh my god, I can't wait to talk about her. But I did like her character, and I think she served her purpose in the series well. I think I mentioned this in my early Build reviews, I really liked how she was like the inverse of Poppy, where Poppy was, her true personality was Poppy, people, like, ah! And then she pretended to be this calm, like, nurse. Was she a nurse or doctor? But like, for the hospital. But then Misora pretended to be the like, YouTube personality, like I do. No. But then, you know, her real personality was kind of drab, at least at the beginning. I thought that was kind of a funny shift. And then you have Sawa, her name was Sawa, right? I like Sawa just fine. She was kind of the most meh for me, just because I did like her dynamic with the group. I felt like she bonded with them. I bought that. But I did hate how they did her betrayal story twice. Like, that felt really redundant. Like, the second one ended up being reinforced by the first, but it still just felt kind of dumb. Like, she betrayed us, but then she betrayed us again. It reminded me of X-Saber's like, but he had 2 surgeries. That means there's 2 twists. And I just didn't like that. And like I said, even though they reinforced each other, I think that it could have been better served by just being one betrayal. And I wasn't a huge fan of that non-children stuff. I just never got involved in that storyline. I mean, like, obviously, because I wasn't in the show. But you know what I mean? Like, I just never was too invested in it or anything like that. Same thing goes for, the only mention I'm going to give of the Gears brothers is that I kind of dug their suit and concept, but I was just never too huge on them enough to spend an enormous amount of time talking about them. The same goes for Mad Rogue, for that matter. I did think it was interesting he was kind of a red herring for Evolt, and that he ended up becoming Mad Rogue, but I just was never, I think he's, again, I hate to use this line of phrasing again, but he served his purpose well as kind of this weird creeper and what he was supposed to be, and I think he went out well in terms of it was very in character, and I like that they weren't trying to do like a 5th redemption. Like, he was still all about the goals that he was about. He didn't have a sudden shift, but he went out in a way that was helpful to our heroes, and so I think he was fine. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about like the Gear brothers and him, just because I don't have a whole lot to say other than just digging for stuff to say, and it's nothing like exciting. Nothing Bokensha exciting. Okay, because I wanted to devote this last bit here before the final verdict talking about Evolt. Evolt or Evil or whatever, Bloodstalk, he's one of my favorite Rider villains of all time. I definitely think there was some stumblings with him, very similar to what I talked about with the plot in the last bit. But I really liked him a lot. I personally didn't really see the twist coming from very far away that the owner guy was going to end up being him. I know there was like that weird stuff with him twisting metal, but I thought that was going to be something different. And so I thought that was a cool twist. The actor portraying him, which is why they went back to him so often, even after they split off and he's like, I'm just going to use this form now, did such a great job of being like intimidating, but like charming and entertaining to watch. He's one of my favorites just because of that alone, like how much fun I had watching him and how much charisma he had and just how much control he had over just every situation. Like, honestly, based off of the initial impressions of the early episodes and the early information, I thought Bloodstalk was just going to kind of be more secondary. Like, Night Rogue seemed like the villain guy of these 2 lackey guys, and it seemed like Bloodstalk was probably going to be Glasses guy, whose name I'm forgetting right now, even though I was just thinking about it. And it was just going to kind of be secondary. I had no idea that this character, I thought, then this is more like a personal thing, but it was going to end up being the mastermind. Kind of reminds me of when Gaim's description made Ryuga sound like the cool sidekick kid that was going to just have to decide between his brother and his best friend, and then he became like one of the most dastardly Rider villain characters in that series. But yeah, so I didn't expect that. A twist you wouldn't believe. So I thought that was super cool. And something I really liked about his dynamic with Sento, Sogo's Geo, Sento and Ryuga especially, was that it reminded me a lot of the Reverse Flash character in the Flash TV series, because there's this added layer to that where he develops a bond with his worst enemies because he's forced to use these people to basically, you know, help himself in a personal way, which is very similar to Reverse Flash. And then in helping them, he developed a kind of bond with them. And I thought that was fascinating. I was really disappointed they never did anything more with that. He would often have those little classic villain lines about admiring them and stuff, but I think that could have been an even richer dynamic if they would have explored that more. Like, I didn't expect him to spare him or go soft, but I think that makes a fantastic internal conflict and a fascinating one where he developed some sort of affection for them, but yet he still either doesn't need them really in the long run or doesn't like them like Reverse Flash. And I thought that was really fascinating. And it really made him seem super smart too, mastermind-wise, that basically he needed both Build and Kraz to further his goals. Like, they each had a specific place in what his goals were, which I thought was super cool. Again, I just wish two things, well, technically three, but two of them are related, but is that they exploited that dynamic more, that we found out more about the lore of him on Mars and his people. We found out a little bit at the end. It was really generic. And again, for as much as I loved him as a mastermind and as a character, I was a little disappointed that his end goals after he basically, you know, fixed himself were very cliche. I was disappointed at that. I wanted to find out more and more interesting stuff about his origins. There might have been some stuff in the movies I don't know about because I haven't seen them yet. But in terms of the series itself, I was disappointed about that. And I think that's something they could have filled the time with in terms of, instead of wheel spinning, maybe expand on that a little bit. I think that could have been something cool if you have to fill that time. And the third thing was, going back to what I was talking about with plot, is that the end arc did him no favors in the constant build and pushback to his end goal. It kind of weakened him a little bit, in my opinion, so that kind of bothered me. But I still did really enjoy him. I just wish we would have gotten to explore things a bit better and not wheel spin so much. Lastly, before the final verdict, I just want to say I do like the designs in this series. There's some hit or miss, but there's also some really cool ones. I love each and every one of his suits. Rogue's is probably my overall favorite. I love the Night Rogue and Bloodstalk suits. I like Build's basic suit. I like the basic black symbiote-esque Rabbit Tank Hazard suit. I didn't want to go too in detail about it other than I like them. The belts are kind of hit and miss. I like the sounds and stuff and the concept of how they work, but they do get kind of clunky after a while. But anyway, I've kept you here long enough. Final verdict, I loved Build a lot. It was not perfect, especially near the end. I wish they didn't wheel spin as much. I wish they didn't backpedal and do some stuff to Ryuga and Sento and Evolt's characters that kind of took, again, to wrap it up, the wind out of what I liked about their characters, because I was in this huge momentum of like, oh man, this is such a great character, so awesome. Then they're like, stupid twist, we gotta undermine this. I kind of wish that didn't happen, and I kind of wish they didn't waste so much time, excuse me, at the end. But overall, it didn't detract my enjoyment, because I think at the end of the day, it did keep me coming back week to week for the plots, and mainly the character dynamics. I really believe the relationship between Build and Ryuga so much, and the little found family. And it was a rare series that the Toku humor almost always landed for me. It can be very hit and miss for me, but it really hit all the buttons of the mystery, the characters, and the quirky humor of Toku that actually lands for me. I overall would give this series, I think, an 8. Very, very good series. It's definitely a special one for me. Lastly, at the end here, again, thanks for those of you that wanted to see this video. It took me a long time because basically I thought about doing something kind of different, then I changed my mind. I recorded one hastily after I changed my mind about something, and I didn't like it, so I sat on it for a really long time. And then Geo came out, and so much news came out, and it just kept getting pushed. But it would really help me out if you could let me know like what you thought of this video, what you'd like to see me expand upon in terms of what I talk about, or maybe what I could talk about less. Mainly because I don't do these scripted, that's not my style. I like to come off organic. So I mainly just kind of mentally think about what I want to talk about and then hit go. So that's easier to do in episode to episode ones. In big picture stuff like this, sometimes, you know, after I record, even after I upload, I'll remember something I really wanted to say that I forgot because I'm having to cover like 40 plus episodes and multiple arcs. So it'd be really helpful to get some feedback of what you want to hear more or less of, so I kind of mentally know what to focus on for the future, because we have like Lupin Ranger versus Pat Ranger series review coming up fairly soon and stuff like that. So yeah, but anyway, just thanks again for those of you that actually want to see these videos. It makes me happy that some people actually enjoy these. But anyway, that's about it until next time. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and of course, don't forget to climb the steps and ring that bell to get notifications for all my videos. Till next time, Kamen Rider, signing out.